Our next speaker is the Vice President of the Proutist Universal Incorporated. A certified public accountant, he has worked in the Philippine government for 29 years. In the 4 decades of his career in the financial sector, he managed startup firms and was a consultant to various companies in the Philippines and abroad. He finished his Master in Public Administration at Wesleyan University, Philippines, and is an alumnus of the UP School of Economics, UP College of Business Administration, and Don Mariano Marcos High School in Ilocos. An articulate writer, he is also the editor of Proud Publications. Meanwhile, Proutist Universal is a global, non-profit charitable education organization of individual members, local units, affiliated federations and programs, and service activities. Proutist Universal operates with the help of career volunteers and members on every continent, with its global headquarters in Copenhagen, Denmark. Through educational efforts and materials, social movements, and activities of its various programs, Proutist Universal seeks to ensure the fulfillment of basic needs for all, an exploitation-free society, ethical leadership, and the implementation of economic democracy for the welfare and happiness of all. Let's all welcome Mr. Arnel Adrian C. Salva to the panel.
Good evening to everyone. So that we make use of the time while the slide is being shared. Okay. So my job is to present at least from my understanding, the Proud's concept of ideal leadership. We don't want to be abstract in the sense that we cannot even connect it to reality, but the broad idea of leadership cannot also be separated from basic concepts like morality, collective leadership, and having a vision. So I would, with the short time we have, I would just like to focus on the main points as I see it, and as exemplified by the propounder of Proud, expounded and exemplified by the propounder of Proud, progressive utilization theory. First, of course, I think that an ideal leader or a good leader must have a vision. He must have an idea where society should be, what an ideal society should be, so that he and a group of people that he would be working with would have a goal to strive for, would have a certain end goal that he and his group would want to reach eventually. So in the screen, you see the 5 fundamental principles. This is, of course, I have to explain this. Proud has 16 principles, and the last 5 are called the fundamental principles. These principles state that at the very least, society must have some limit on accumulation of physical wealth. Definitely, it is very clear that even during this pandemic, the billionaires in the world even amassed more wealth, while millions and millions of people lost their livelihood. So one of the principles of Proud is that physical wealth there should be a limit or a cap to how much physical wealth a person can accumulate. The rest of the principles were also articulated by the previous speaker about maximum utilization, rational distribution. So I will not expound on that anymore. But the idea is that a leader must be guided by some principles, so that he cannot just be. Flexibility is okay. You should adapt. You should adjust to changing situations. But you must also have bedrock principles. Otherwise, it will be very easy to stray from the good and narrow, so to speak, if you don't have basic principles. And one of the principles that have already been addressed earlier is that the concept of economic democracy. The idea of Proud is that more than political democracy or simply electing good leaders, is that there should also be the democracy in the economic sphere, so that the people have their basic needs, the people are gainfully and meaningfully employed, their needs are satisfied, so that they cannot be pawns to so-called politicians when it comes election time, because they cannot, their votes cannot be bought, because they have a livelihood, they are okay, they are surviving, and they cannot be manipulated by a few sacks of rice or a few hundreds of pesos or a few thousands of pesos, so that they will vote for them come election time. Another point is that the leader must have an idea of where society must be, and from the Prout perspective, we look at society as one human society. Of course, we have regions, we have nations, we have so-called blocks right now because of certain sentiments that confine our view or of looking at things. But in Prout, we think that we should have a broad outlook, and that we should look at humanity as one, and therefore this is what we should also work for in the long term. We are not only Filipinos, we are also human beings. We are members of the entire human race. Next slide, please. So the idea of moral leadership was also mentioned earlier, even in the introduction, because it is very, very basic to the idea of leadership of Prout. We cannot, you see, Plato said there's mentioned the concept of philosopher king. I think Robert Greenleaf expounded on servant leader. The idea of Prout is that you see the term sadvipra there. For those who are not familiar, it means an intellectual or an intelligent person that is following strictly the code of morality and also truthfulness. In the point of view of P.R. Sarkar, a sadvipra is a well-rounded personality. That's why none of us, I think, can claim that he or she is a sadvipra right now, because it's such an ideal concept of leadership. But we can certainly aspire to become one in time, sooner rather than later. Later, if not sooner, but at least we are aspiring. So a sadvipra is a moral person, steeped in morality, and dedicated to serving society. He looks at society as his own, and he will adjust the way he does things or the way he pursues things according to the need of society at the moment. Next slide, please. Now, another concept of leadership in Prout is collective leadership. So you differentiate this from autocracy, one-person leadership. We believe that leadership should be from the grassroots, and it's something that should be recognized by society or by the community from the example that these so-called leaders or budding sadvipras, you can say, are demonstrating in society. So we envision a group as separate from the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. We call social boards, that will be composed of people acclaimed by the community as having the interest of society at heart. They are the ones who selflessly serve society, even if they are not getting paid so much or not being honored as much, but they are dedicated to helping their fellow men. So in a community, these people get to be acclaimed, you can say, by the people for the good things that they do. So these are we envision them to form social boards so that they will be looking at what the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary are doing, so that they will set them straight if they are not doing their elected role, the roles they were elected for by the people. And they should, of course, be leading by example, not just by talking. So I shouldn't be talking so much, actually, but it's important that we understand that the idea of leadership in the Prout perspective is that they will be acclaimed by the people for the things they do, not just for the things they did. It's a kind of grassroots democracy. So last slide, just quickly on this. Of course, the question is, how do we get there? We have a long-standing slogan in Prout. We say, transform yourself, transform society. I think many of us have read the book Animal Farm. You may have read the book Animal Farm if you remember. So the pigs were rebelling against the human beings because they were being exploited. And so they rebelled against the human beings and they became the leaders in the community. But they were not prepared for leadership because they were rebelling against the human beings for violating their rights, but they never adhered to any transformation process. They never transformed themselves in the process before they took over. So eventually they become the hated human beings at the end of the story. So to us, we say there are all sorts of problems out there in society. My good friend Lan enumerated them, and I'm sure she hasn't even reached the half of the problems that we now have. But key to this is, if you want to change society, you also should start with yourself. You should adhere to moral principles so that when you get to be in a position of responsibility or power later on, if God gives you that privilege, you should be able to lead without being corruptible at the first sign of temptation. And in the transformation process, there must also be some mental expansion practice so that the mind is not bound by dogma. Dogma are ideas that limit the natural tendency of the mind to expand. You should look at data, you should look at science, not on certain narrow ideas. If you are a person who wants to become a leader, some kind of mental expansion technique or discipline should serve you well. And then, of course, you should dedicate your life to serving society in whatever way you can, as a government servant, as a community volunteer, or as a good professional, doing your profession in the best way you know, without getting yourself corrupted in the process. So I would like to sum up that our idea of leadership is that first you must have a vision, then you must have a way to transform yourself so that if you are given a position of responsibility in the future, you should be ready to step up to the plate when that time comes. Thank you very much.